You're learning a new language, right? Putting in the time, maybe hours every week.
Doing the apps, listening.
Yeah, maybe reading. And yet somehow you still feel stuck. Like progress is just crawling. Or maybe it feels like it's stopped altogether.
That classic intermediate plateau feeling. Or just, stagnation.
It's super common and really frustrating, honestly.
It absolutely is. Well, often it's not about simply not trying hard enough.
Right.
It's more about maybe getting caught in some subtle trash or overlooking some basics.
Exactly. So our mission is to explore why. Why does that stagnation happen? We want to uncover some of those common pitfalls, things that might be slowing you down. And more importantly, pull out the practical strategies for, spotting these issues and getting back on track.
Right. The idea is by the end of this, hopefully, you'll have a clearer picture of what might be going on in your own learning and maybe some concrete ideas for how to jumpstart things again.
Right. Okay, so one of the first things that really jumped out was something surprisingly simple, foundational even.
Yeah, it's that fundamental need for just adequate regularity, consistency, and practice. If the language isn't a regular part of your week, ideally daily, your brain just doesn't prioritize it. You can't really expect steady improvement without steady interaction.
Right. It's like hitting the gym once every 2 weeks and wondering why you're not getting stronger.
Exactly that.
The sources were really clear. It wasn't just about the total hours, but the frequency. Little bursts daily often beat one marathon session weekly.
Yeah, without that consistent, regular touch point, improvement naturally slows right down. It just inherently grinds to a halt.
And this kind of connects to something else, like this tendency to spend time looking for the magic bullet instead of just, doing the work.
The endless quest for the perfect, effortless strategy.
I know that one. Spending hours watching videos about how to learn, reading articles comparing all the methods, debating techniques in forums.
And it all feels productive, doesn't it?
Totally. But it's not actually doing the language learning itself.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Contemplating swimming for a year without ever getting in the water.
Okay.
Yeah. You can become an expert in language learning theory, but if you're not, actively using the language, you won't improve. Simple as that.
So this is saying methods are irrelevant, just that the search can become the actual distraction?
Exactly. There wasn't one single universally perfect method described anywhere. What works is really personal. The big takeaways seem to be: experiment. Try different things. Find what clicks for you, what helps you stick with it consistently. The magic of any method is just its power to get you to show up every day.
That makes a lot of sense. Find what keeps you coming back. Okay, so moving on from how often you practice, what about what you're actually practicing? Another big barrier seemed to be limited or maybe unrealistic chances for practical application.
Oh, this is crucial. So many learners get really good at specific, maybe
academic things like reading complex texts.
Yeah, or understanding niche podcasts. But they aren't using the language for just normal everyday stuff. Authentic situations.
It's like talking about their own life.
Exactly. Really striking example, they could read a newspaper article about international trade, no problem.
Wow.
But feel completely tongue-tied trying to talk about, brushing their teeth that morning, or what they were having for dinner.
Whoa, that's a serious disconnect. Skilled in one area, but lost when it comes to your own reality.
Yes. And apparently, this leads to real shyness. That feeling that your actual ability would just sort of crumble if you tried to have a simple personal chat.
I can see that.
Natural fluency, it seems, really develops best when you're using the language to talk about your life. Familiar contexts.
So how did this suggest bridging that gap? What were the fixes?
First, journaling. In the target language, obviously.
Okay.
I found this incredibly helpful because it takes away the real-time pressure. You can sit, reflect on your day, look up words you need.
Practice phrasing without needing an instant response.
Exactly. Explore how to express your personal thoughts. Doesn't matter if it's digital or pen and paper.
Makes sense. Practicing the personal stuff in a low-stakes way. And the second approach, this one felt quite powerful and actively connecting
with people who speak the language. Yeah, especially native speakers or experienced teachers.
Okay. Real interaction.
Yes. Finally breaking through their plateau when they committed to regular one-on-one sessions. It gave them that essential speaking practice. building confidence in exactly those everyday scenarios.
Right.
How platforms now make it pretty easy to find flexible, personalized ways to do this.
Yeah, getting real feedback on how you talk about your breakfast is probably way more useful at that stage than just reading another economics paper.
Precisely. You've got to use the language to talk about your world.
Okay, so let's say you are practicing consistently and you are trying to use it in everyday situations. What happens when you make a mistake? Which you will. The whole perfection thing, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. That excessive pursuit of faultlessness, it was a huge theme.
Comparing yourself to some ideal native speaker.
Or just some perfect version in your head. Yeah, paralysis by perfection.
It literally stops you from even opening your mouth sometimes.
Exactly. That intense focus on getting the pronunciation just right, perfect grammar, the exact word. It just makes learners hesitant. They avoid situations where they might mess up.
And then when a mistake inevitably does
Tap and perfectionist instinct kicks in. Harsh self-criticism.
pray, and you get caught in that awful loop. Try to be perfect, make a mistake, feel terrible, beat yourself up, which makes you want to be even more perfect next time, but also terrifies you so you practice less.
Yeah, it's totally self-defeating. That cycle came up again and again in different ways.
So what's the way out?
The most powerful fix, shifting your mindset. Moving from being a harsh critic to being more like a neutral observer.
How did that work?
So instead of that emotional reaction, ugh, I messed up again, I'm terrible, you just notice the mistake. Almost like a scientist. Interesting. You might think, interesting, I used the wrong verb tense there. Let me analyze where that happened. It lets you learn from the error constructively, without all the emotional baggage that shuts down practice and makes you shy.
Okay, I like that.
Framing it as a question. Why did I make that mistake? Instead of a judgment, I'm so bad at verbs.
That feels like a really practical mental switch. Observe, analyze, don't self-destruct. Okay. Now, speaking of analysis, looked at how we engage with the learning material itself, right? This idea of over-relying on unfocused methods.
Leaning too heavily on passive learning.
You mean like listening to podcasts or watching shows while you're doing other things, commuting, cooking?
Exactly that.
I definitely do that. Is that bad? I thought immersion was good.
Well, passive exposure isn't bad exactly. One source pointed out it's fine for, general exposure, getting the sound of the language, maybe when you're tired. But relying only on that for significant improvement, that's where it becomes ineffective. Yeah, because by definition, you're not giving it your full focused attention.
Right. You're not actively processing it deeply.
Precisely. Active learning requires deliberate effort. It means sitting down, concentrating, really interacting with the material.
Like pausing to look up words.
Yeah, or dissecting a grammar point, summarizing what you just heard, saving new vocabulary. It's definitely more demanding.
More brain power needed, for sure.
Even just 15 minutes of focused active study resulted in more measurable progress than an hour of passive listening while multitasking.
Wow, okay. So passive can supplement, but active is where the real gains are. If time is tight, make that time active.
Yeah, consciously finding even small pockets for focused work.
Okay, what else does lag as a potential roadblock?
A lack of awareness or maybe acceptance of language transfer.
You mean how your native language kind of interferes?
Exactly, or other languages you know. That natural, totally inevitable influence on the new one you're learning.
Like bringing over grammar rules that don't fit, or using false friends words that sound similar but mean different things.
Precisely. Feeling really frustrated at first, thinking, why do I keep making this simple mistake? It's so obvious. And then they realize it was just their native language subtly getting in the way.
Yeah.
And this happens to everyone. It's unavoidable.
So the fix isn't to feel bad about it, but to what?
To accept it and observe it.
Yeah.
Recognize that, this influence is happening. Your existing language knowledge is part of you. It will shape how you initially tackle the new language.
Okay.
The strategy then becomes spending extra time consciously focusing on those specific words or structures where your native language is most likely to cause confusion. Target those areas.
Like that classic example of English library versus Spanish libreria.
Exactly. Libreria means bookstore, right?
Yeah.
It's a super understandable mix-up because they look so similar, they're cognate. Once they stopped feeling bad about confusing them, and instead just dedicated specific practice time to library, biblioteca, and bookstore, libreria, using them in different sentences, the confusion cleared up way faster.
So it's about targeted effort right where that transfer is likely to happen. Identify the friction points. Lean into those
specific spots where your linguistic background might trip you up.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, and finally, what about that habit of just translating everything in your head?
The excessive dependence on translation. a major bottleneck.
Constantly translating every single word, every sentence back into your native language before you can understand it or say something. Yes. Why is that such a hurdle? It feels kind of automatic, doesn't it?
It forces a huge amount of extra cognitive work. Just extra processing. It drastically slows you down both understanding and speaking, and it makes it way harder to actually internalize the new language's vocabulary and like its natural flow and structure, because you're always inserting this unnecessary middle step.
Right. So the goal is to sort of bypass that translation step. Think directly in the target language.
Yes, exactly. To get to the point where you can see something or have a thought and express it directly in the new language, just like you do automatically in your native one.
How on earth do you even start doing that? That sounds really hard.
Well, few techniques to build more direct association. So instead of translating a word, try to link it directly to an image, maybe a feeling, or connect it to concepts you already know within the target language if possible. One source really stressed creating example sentences that are super relevant to your own
life, your experiences, not just abstract dictionary definitions.
Right. Make it personal. And crucially, just encountering words and structures frequently in lots of different contexts. Yeah, it builds those direct connections over time.
So build that direct link, new word, concept, or image. Cut out the native language middleman.
Review techniques are key here. Spaced repetition systems, like those flashcard apps, is a really effective way to review vocabulary at the right intervals to help solidify those direct connections. Keep them fresh.
Okay, so build that web of meaning directly in the target language and use smart tools to reinforce it. Brilliant. Wow, we've really covered a lot here. 7 pretty distinct reasons why your progress might feel stalled, and importantly, concrete, actionable ways to tackle them.
Absolutely. From making sure practice is consistent and actively trying methods that actually
work for you personally, to intentionally using the language in real everyday ways, adopting that observer mindset about mistakes, prioritizing active
learning over just passive listening, accepting and
targeting language transfer, and consciously working to rely less on direct translation.
Yeah.
It's actually kind of reassuring, isn't it, to see how common these hurdles are. Feeling stuck is, it seems like part of the journey for a lot of learners. But these insights show it doesn't have to be where you stay. These are genuinely things you can do. For sure.
And if we had to pick one strategy that seemed to weave through several of these issues, it was probably that point about actively connecting with people.
Right. Especially native speakers or teachers.
Yeah, because that directly hits the need for consistent, realistic, everyday practice. Using the language to talk about you.
And it helps you get comfortable making mistakes in a supportive space, which is huge for breaking that perfectionism cycle. Builds real confidence.
Absolutely. Breaking through their plateau once they started regular conversation practice. Yeah, it was really compelling.
Yeah, that feels like a very concrete next step someone listening right now could actually explore, finding ways to have those real conversations. Okay, so if we just step back for a second, look at everything. If language learning progress isn't really about finding one single magic method or reaching some kind of flawless endpoint, but it's more about consistent, active, targeted work, connecting with others, embracing the whole process.
It does raise an interesting question, doesn't it?
Yeah. Maybe the real key isn't just striving for that perfect destination, but actually learning how to communicate effectively, authentically.
Yeah.
And maybe even find some joy and growth within the ongoing, inevitably imperfect journey of just connecting with people. Something to definitely think about.